It's so funny. When you were not here, I was doing a kind of a dress rehearsal, and I was talking to an invisible Yashodhan, which felt really nice. I was just telling
Is
Pranati that
am I supposed to take
um,
that as a compliment
I
or
don't
an
know what you
insult?
have to take it as,
You
but
felt nice talking to
an
an
invisible
imaginary.
Yashodhan who I just imagined how he
Right.
was supposed to be or would like will be in the future. I was imagining having that conversation with
Sounding a
him.
lot
So
like my mom right now.
but
She says the same
yeah,
things.
so that was the introduction to this
Right.
podcast. But
Yeah.
I think so. Guys, welcome to the second episode of Conversations with Authors. We have a very interesting author today, my friend. We've had so many conversations over the last year, and this is the most awaited podcast, so to speak. I'm like dying to ask him questions about what he is, who he is, his book, his future plans, and everything about poetry. Um, Welcome, Yashodhaan Burange.
Thank you so much.
We are very happy to have you at Book Bar.
Likewise. Likewise.
And I usually want to avoid giving introductions, which is evident from the last podcast. So I'm going to have Yashodhan talk about who he is, what he does, and yes, this is his book, Inertia. So
Thank you so much. Uh, so yeah, we've already established my name. We've established the fact that we are very good friends and we do this often. Uh, I'm also very regular at Book Bar, just in case, for people who haven't seen me around. Love the vibe of this place. So primarily, like I say, I'm a writer on my good days and I'm a poet on my bad days. The reason why I say that is there's a lot of in between that I work with on my bad days. It's also phases of my life, but that aside for now, I'm a poet and a writer. I am a huge coffee lover. I love music. I sometimes write lyrics and work with music on with my very good friends. Currently doing a lot of nothing and a bit of everything as well at the same time. Working on my second book, which will be hopefully be out, by June or July. So that is what I'm doing right now. I'm a literature major as well.
oh,
Yeah.
nice. So I think um, before we get into your writing, your book, let's just move a little behind in terms of the timeline and just give a background about your growing up years, your studies, what got you
Right.
into writing,
Yeah.
and so on and so forth.
Yeah. So, funnily enough, I was thinking about why I got into poetry last night while driving. It's also where most of my writing happens in my head when I'm driving. And I realized call it fate or call it destiny, it was meant to make me a poet. It was meant to get me into writing. Because talking about childhood, I come from a place of abandonment. For poets, there has to be something primarily off in their heads. I don't mean that disrespectfully, but when something is missing, it allows a poet to create that. It allows a poet to fill in that beauty. So, the childhood or the place of abandonment that I came from, I was always, even as a child, trying to fill the place of my father. I was trying to create something, I was trying to create imagery, I was trying to create a persona which, I would have loved to have as a father in my head. And without realizing that persona shifted and it became poetry. It became slowly, about the things I would have loved to fill in my life, about the presence I would have liked. So that is how I got into writing. I got into writing because something was missing, and that was my way of filling it. That was my
So,
way
to
of,
interrupt,
yeah.
what do you mean by father?
Uh,
How does the father fit into all of this?
right. So my parents got separated when I was a few months old, and they got separated, and I lived with my mother. My mother raised me,
Mhm.
and I lost my father a few years ago, and he was a complete stranger. I didn't know him. I knew his intent. I knew his emotions for me, but we never got around to having a conversation. I'd met him thrice or four, thrice or maybe four times maximum. And growing up, as a boy, when you see the typical family all around you, a father, a mother, and kids, sister, and all of that, it sort of puts a question in your head: what is missing in my life, or why do I not get it? It took me a while to truly understand what is the situation that is happening. So I've always been someone who will make the absence of something its presence.
Right.
So this is where the father came into the picture with my writing, right? Yeah, I was always trying to recreate the presence of someone who was entirely absent all my
Right.
life.
Right.
And through that, the layers kept shifting. Then poetry arrived, writing arrived, and I realized I have an incredible passion for not accepting the fact that something is not here. I will try to recreate it in my own heart. I'll try to, give it that sort of voice, that sort of heart, soul. So that is how poetry happened, and that was the significance of my father's absence behind it. That him not being here is the reason why poetry arrived, stayed, and then matured, as I like to think
So
in my head.
it was a part of processing the pain.
Yeah,
Was the pen and paper like your best friend? Like how you have a dear diary, right?
right, right.
Did that kind of fuel you to express your hurt inside? Because as you said, there
Yeah,
was abandonment and
right,
all of that around you. Like usually people will talk to friends or family
right.
as they grow up at school,
Yeah,
but then there is something which you feel no one understands, and that
right.
is something which you need to pen down, uh,
Yeah.
because somewhere it's a form of expression, right? And
Hmm.
of course every time you grow up,
Right.
the expression changes, the form of it
Absolutely.
changes, the
Absolutely.
intensity changes, your vocabulary changes, you have new
Yes.
words to describe the same
Yes.
feeling, right?
Right.
So was it that? Because and I think we'll dive deeper later in the conversation to understand what makes a poet.
Yeah.
Is pain usually the root of poetry, and pain is something which, like, love and hate, pain, joy, sorrow,
Right.
they're all a part of the same spectrum, so to speak,
Yes.
right? So
Yes.
as a poet, where does it come from for you?
Right. So, a lot of, if I have to talk about the traces of it, where it all started, the roots of it, they do start from my childhood because, like I said, with my parents' separation, I was dominantly a very lonely child because my mother used to work and provide for herself and, for me. So, when you've been raised in a very quiet house, when you're the quiet, lonely kid, you learn to start having conversations with yourself. You learn to start having a very vivid imagination. You learn to create where there is nothing. Because now when I think about it, I needed presence. I needed parents. I needed friends. But I was never guided, nor was I allowed in a lot of ways to socialize because of these situations.
Right.
So, being a lonely child, it allows you to create a world in your head. You get extremely good at your intuition. You get extremely good at noticing the things you don't, because that is the premise of poetry. Sometimes poetry will give you what most conversations wouldn't. Because with conversations, everything is out there. You and I can talk about something. At the end of the day, a lot of us will just take facts from it. Right?
Right.
This conversation. There'll
Right.
be key points in your head. Poetry is that emotion that lingers. It's the melancholy. Like, imagine a very good guitar solo. If I'm to ask you, Avnish, can you point out the guitar notes in that solo? You'll be like, not really. But if
The
I'm to say you,
feel,
yeah, the feel
the
of it, right?
intuitive feeling.
Absolutely. So you're driving, your car at night, and there's a beautiful guitar solo that comes up. You know that feeling. You know that feeling because something inside you happens. Something inside you takes birth. So poetry often is that, and it also comes from that place. It's a feeling that is, yes, replicated with words, but to be honest, for that feeling itself, there are no words. It's it's very weird to explain what and where poetry comes from, but we can always say that we know how poetry can make us feel. So for me, it absence is how a lot of creation started. So for what doesn't exist, me as a poet, I began to fill the spaces.
So
I
you
began to
created
bring
your
light.
own world with it,
Absolutely,
which
absolutely,
people didn't have access to. It was only
absolutely.
something personal to you.
Right, and
And
it's a very private world, which is why, I mean, you would know because you have, extreme proximity to my private life. There are moments when I'll disappear. There are moments when I'll take a step back from socializing, where everything might appear normal, but I'm going back in my head, to that room inside my head, because that is how I process, that is how I identify feelings, that is how I like to build something and come to terms with something good or something bad.
right.
So when you have been raised as a lonely lone child in your house, space is something you will have an extremely close relationship with.
Right.
You need a lot of space, and when you don't get it, you will start to rebel and fight for space.
Right.
And that is where poetry functions.
Right.
Poetry arrives when there is no space, and you create it.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So basically, abandonment, absence,
Right.
a lot
All
of
neighbors.
loneliness,
Yes.
a feeling of no one will understand me, all
Right.
mixed into a dish, is how you started cooking
Absolutely. Absolutely.
your words, right?
Absolutely. I was in fact, toying with a poem last night, and it was about the ingredients of Yashodhaan, for example. Like what makes the dish called Yashodhaan. And I realized the ingredients have always been so out of place and so out of the right portion or quantity that now when I'm to recreate this dish, I wouldn't be able to.
Ah,
Somehow my mother perfected this dish without even me knowing it. And even she doesn't know the exact recipe to what makes a poet out of a son or what makes a son into a poet.
right,
We don't know that. So the
right,
recipe of all of these emotions finally coming into poetry is so unpredictable, and that's the beauty of it. You
right.
cannot portion anything.
So, when did this internal dialogue and
Right,
something which was very private
right.
become something which became external, something which became protest, something which became a fact that, you know what, I want to show the world what my world is.
Right.
And of course, initially in the childhood, it would be very private. But
Yeah.
when you went to college,
Right.
when you knew for a fact that you are someone who can write and who
Yeah.
can express and who can
Yeah.
impact people.
Yeah.
When did that shift happen and why? And when did you decide that, okay, you know what? I think I can write. I can transport people to different worlds. I can control them. I can impact them, influence them through my words. When did that moment arrive?
So, very interesting question. So, the roots of all of this go to around my ninth or 10th grade because I remember having, very heavy, intense emotions within me, not realizing at that point that it was anxiety. It was a sort of panic, it was a sort of depression, all of these things which now we have the labels for. I had no information of it as a school kid. And I remember back then my school psychologist and my English teacher. My English teacher back then always knew I had a thing for writing because I used to be really good at expressing myself where the question allowed me to.
Right,
Okay, how do you feel about a certain thing is where I would ace.
right,
I would be extremely bad at very technical subjects.
right.
That was not my forte. So my school teacher knew I had a thing for expression and how I could express. So I remember being, sitting in a room, a very intimidating room with my mom next to me, the school psychologist and the English teacher, and I thought I was in trouble. And my mom tells me, you know what, your teachers have something to say to you, and you're going to hear them out. And they went on a very long conversation about how I'm not doing well, how I'm
Right,
never paying attention, how
right,
I'm always looking very withdrawn. And then
right,
they said, you know what, all of these feelings that you feel, why don't you start writing them?
right.
Because once you write them, they used a very LHS is equal to RHS sort of equation. They're like, you don't know what's happening. The minute you write it on the paper, now at least you can see it. Now at least you know what is happening. Which is why they said every word that you write, you now know exactly what you feel. And funnily, when I think about it now, it is not a very good advice to give to someone who would be a writer, because sometimes it makes things too accurate.
Right.
It's like if I'm writing about, let's say, a bomb explosion, if I write with painful accuracy, it's going to start creating that thing in my head again. Like talking about the shrapnel, people dying, the fire, and all of that. If I write it with more accuracy and with those details, I'm going to recreate it in my head. So back then it worked because it at least allowed me some sort of expression. It allowed me to get into it. But now when I think about it, I mean, it's that ship has sailed. But so that is how I got into writing, because I did not know what I was thinking, as most
So
writers do.
this is where you expressed externally instead of
Absolutely,
internally.
absolutely. I used to always have this very weird monologue in my head about how I'm feeling. What is this? Ye kya, ye kya, ye kya. And once I started writing, I realized, maybe I don't feel things with this intensity or length sometimes, which is also where writing helps. But I do feel something. And to identify what I'm feeling is how the writing happened, is how it started. So all of those traces, all of those roots go back to my 9th, 10th, this thing. And in college, I realized, I was a very bad student. I hated going to college. I hate being in classrooms because
Right.
I'm a very distant.
Right,
We
right, right.
always zone out when
Of
we are
course.
having conversations. So I was not a very good student, but English is where I used to really, enjoy. I used to love reading poetry. I used to love reading essays and all of that. It just did something to me. Because as a child, I used to love reading books. It
Right.
allowed me to spend time with myself and not hate myself
So
for it.
that was your companion, so to
That
speak,
was
and that
that I
fueled.
found my best friend again, which midway I had abandoned. I found my best friend again, and then through that, people started telling me, you know what, you have a way you express. Certain things you say stay with us. It's that. It again goes back to abandonment. It's that sentence when someone says, something you say stayed with us. It stays with me as
So
well.
you did you feel empowered by that? Like, okay, I think while I can express my hurt and pain
Right.
and be a certain way,
Right.
I also can say things which can empower others, which can help others.
Yes.
During this time from your panic attack to realizing that you can write, uh, I'm looking for that point in your education or
Right.
your college days where you were like, okay, you know what? I think I want to be a writer.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, and of course, you can't have this overnight. It is a series of things which build up, which come to that point.
Yeah.
But I'm sure you will have a specific incident or a specific phase where you like, okay, you know what? I think I can associate my identity as Yashodhaan the poet,
Yeah.
the writer, not just my grief, but also to use it as a vehicle to impact people, to empower
Absolutely.
people, to transport them into different worlds, to
Yes.
uh, you know, it's an unsaid thing. So within you, which makes you like, you know what, I think this is what I want to do. Like in my career, I was very clear that I wanted to play sport.
Right.
But I knew why, and I knew how it felt when I went on the cricket
Yeah.
field. So,
Yeah.
what is that for you?
It's, this is very interesting because the incident that I'm going to talk about,
Did a girl make you want to write? Did a
it's
breakup do? Did love do? Because these are very common things which move people into doing crazy things.
this. See, there's a very beautiful quote I read. You write your best when you're either falling in love or out of it, and it impacts me, and it's extremely true to me. But the reason why I started doing all of this was, yeah, for me, poetry arrived by the virtue of subtraction. I realized all the things I was not good at. So I kept removing it. And there's a
Aha.
long list of things I'm not
That's
good
a
at.
that's an interesting way to approach a career decision.
It's like poetry was this person in a crowded room. I sort of knew this person, but I did not know anyone else. So shifting through the crowd, I'm like, there you are. I know you.
Right,
I know you from a very long time.
right.
That is how the conversation started. And then eventually, that first love happens. Then you happen in the first love, and then both are taken away. There's a lot of pain, there's a lot of ecstasy, there's a lot of joy in all of this love, lust, intimacy, finding the girl, having a crush, making her a muse, and all of that. Those are all very significant parts of poetry, my poetry as well. But यार वो एक phase थी. There was a phase where I was writing to, for the first time in my life, prove to a girl I really liked what she meant for me and what I am capable of. Because typically I didn't have a lot of things going for me. I didn't have that appearance thing. I didn't have a lot of money. So what back then, what I used to think girls really want, I had nothing of it. So what was I left with? The only thing that I was left with is, how can I express with intensity? I want to be the last man standing when you're done with all of them, so that I can tell you what you mean to me. So a lot of those
So
things arrived.
poetry got fueled by a want to impress a girl,
Not only impress, to keep a girl, and then
to
to
maintain
also,
the relationship.
like back then, like very early in college, because that's how college kids are, man. Like
Of course.
you have a crush on someone, you
You
And
want to give them your soul. You want to
yeah, yeah,
give them some value, and whatever. Like
absolutely.
some people will play the guitar, some people will write a song,
There you
some
go.
people will use money,
Yeah,
material things.
yeah,
Some people are great in conversations,
absolutely.
or some people
Yeah,
are all of it
yeah. And
together.
you know,
Right?
10 years ago, we didn't like our way of impressing as men, our way of impressing women back then was very different to what the kids these days do.
Right.
We don't have this so-called riz which these boys speak of, right? So our way was very different. It came from a sentimental place.
Mm.
It came from a place of vulnerability where a lot of emotions were at display, and then the woman used to or the girl used to still not choose you. So there are different ways when you're not chosen that you will break.
Mm.
Some will target that into getting better physically,
Right.
mentally. Some become poets, is
Right.
how I would say it.
Right.
But a very typical incident I remember is it was not anything to do with this crush or romantic interest. I remember earlier when I started posting on Instagram, a year or two down the line, I got a message from this girl, and she said, this is the first time we are having a conversation, but I'd like to tell you something. And she's like, I don't know how you're going to take it, but I'd just like to tell you what you writing does, mean for me.
Mm.
And she told me that she was in a long distance relationship with her boyfriend who was visually impaired. So their routine at
Oh.
night was she used to read my poems
Wow.
out loud to him till he fell asleep.
Wow.
And I remember sitting there reading that message, and I'm getting goosebumps even now. And I broke down. I had tears from my eyes because I realized the place where I come from, that broken place at the end of the day, is connecting people somewhere out there in the world, and I would have never known this. That there exist in this world two souls, two humans
Mm.
right now,
Who are connected because of
who
your
yeah,
words.
who when they
Wow.
don't have words for themselves,
Beautiful.
who when they don't have physical touch, my words are the bridge. So when a lot of people ask me why do I do what I do it because there is a girl out there in this part of the world who wants to reach out to her visually impaired boyfriend to
Wow.
show him the
What a
world.
feeling. What a feeling.
And I just like every time I think about it, I'm a very spiritual person, and now I can say this with pride because I know where I am. This is what I mean about my writing is a medium, and I am a medium. Because two souls are connected. It could be anyone, not just me as a writer, it could be anyone. But this is the beauty of poetry that when words are failing, normal conversation is failing, there's a poem that just comes and, two people in love can sit in silence and experience it together. That is the beauty. And I remember it. And on my very, very, very bad days, I hang on to my poetry with that passion
Mm.
and intensity because of this.
Mm.
Because this is what it can do. So,
Interesting.
yeah.
So interesting. You know, start to
Yeah.
your life, so to speak, from
Yeah.
childhood abandonment to college to identifying poetry in a crowded room,
Yeah.
and of course romance and love and all
Yeah.
of it, and then coming to the feeling of empowerment where
Yep.
you kind of realize that okay, I think I'm a medium, right?
Hmm.
So what happened to this?
Uh,
What how did inertia happen?
so,
I mean, I really want to talk about this book because for me, when I'd met Yashodhaan for the first time, I had no idea about his writing, and he just gave me this, and I I couldn't stop reading this book. I read this 3 times, and
yeah.
some of my favorite poetry in this book.
Yeah.
It was like, it. So I've written this as a review for you. Either it'll make you overthink or it'll just keep make you speechless. I was lost
That's
because
quite something.
I'm like, okay, why am I overthinking everything? And then after that I'm like just silent. I'm numb. I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
Such simplicity yet so impactful. And I think your poetry, the beauty, and everyone will agree, is the way you observe things which people don't, and you put it very simply. It's so relatable. It
Hmm.
comes so simply, and then there is one punchline which just like boom, like
Yeah.
it just makes you so in awe of the words, right, and of the experience. So how did inertia happen? When did you decide that, I think I have enough content and enough inspiration to kind of put it all into a medium, which is a
Yeah.
book.
Yeah.
And how was that like? Let's talk about Inertia and the days of writing
Yeah.
this book.
So, to be very honest, I never imagined myself publishing a book. It was something that felt, how we talk about how always all the good things happen to our neighbors, and we can hear that through the doors of our living room. That is how publishing a book was for me in my head. But I never, to be very honest, I never believed that I would publish a book one day, let alone have it impact not only strangers but my very close friends like this. So, Inertia is the epitome, the start, the collection of my very early days as a poet. It is a beautiful time because I was guided by longing. I was impacted by it. If you ask me what inertia is the translation of my longing at the end of the day. It's a lot of questions that perhaps might not get the answers, but those questions softly dissolve into longing and poetry. So inertia happened when I realized there are a few emotions, a few poems that can go with each other, that can hold each other's hand, and when a person loses themselves in it or reads, they can take a step back once they're done and have a very unique feeling in their chest. What that feeling is not for me to decide. Because I can never tell you what inertia should make you feel. And to be honest, I also believe no poet should, be able to say, come out there and say, but this is what my writing should make you feel. Because poetry is fundamentally not that. Poetry is a playground. You have words as, I don't know, as slides and swings and all of that. Play with it. See how it makes you feel. See what happens when you go, on that swing, when you're almost going to do a complete circle and then when you're swinging out again.
Right.
That exhilaration, that joy, that fear, the multiple emotions that happen. So, inertia for me was a lot of exploration to see what can my writing make people feel at the end of the day. Is it going to truly impact them? Because, yeah, Ravnish, I don't believe I genuinely want to or have the capacity to change lives, as people say. If it's happening, I'm very fortunate. I'm very blessed. But it's something that never was in my head because I've never considered myself, being able to do so. I could never do it. I'm not saying out of humility, I'm saying I simply don't believe I have the ability to do so.
Right.
So, inertia for me was just an expression where this is something that's going to, it comes from me, it's going to be out there in the part of the world. And again, we have to go back to abandonment. Inertia happened because I wanted a part of me to stay after I'm no longer here.
So legacy.
A legacy. Inertia was
But
my.
what was Inertia? Sorry, just a culmination of everything truncated into 60 pages. By the
Yeah.
way, I think just for context, we should explain what Inertia is all about so that
Yeah.
people who have not read Inertia
Right,
have a
right.
little context.
Right.
One of my favorite books available on Amazon. Yashodhaan, why don't you just quickly give a glimpse of what Inertia is all about, and then
Yeah.
we can move ahead in the conversation.
So inertia is it's a collection of poems, as I like to say. There's no specific theme. It just talks about everything that one might feel. It's a lot of question marks. It's a lot of longing. It's a lot of pain. And as my very good friend here keeps pointing out, despite the pain, there's hope. Despite the pain, there's a hand that does not abandon when you reach out.
So is it for a diverse audience? Because
Yes.
everyone goes through these situations. So there's
Yes.
familiarity in the pain, and
Yes.
then you leave it with that tingling sense of hope. And as I
Yes.
always say, like you always find hope
Yes.
where you've left it the last. It's
Absolutely.
such a weird thing, right?
100%.
You leave hope at a certain point in your
Right.
life. You end up coming to the same point to find it and
Yes.
then move in a different direction,
Hundred
right?
percent.
So
100%.
so these poems which you've written are
Yes.
like human emotions, mostly
100%.
yours,
Yeah.
but and some of them are personal. Like
Right.
you've talked about your father, you've talked
Yes.
about absence,
Yes.
you've talked about longing, you've talked about
Heartbreak.
love,
Yeah.
you've talked about heartbreaks.
Yeah.
You've in some poetry just a single line, like
Yeah.
and just a very relatable thing. So
Right.
so
It's basically the let's say a diary of a poet made public. The diary of this poet made public because, like you said, for me, inertia was Yeah, I believe the attempt of hope is hope as well. So Inertia was my attempt at having hope, because this happened to me as all life-changing things do for me when I was going through a very dark phase of my life, when everything I was a question mark, or everything I was being compared to people better than me. So Inertia happened to give me hope, and the funny part is, like you said, I gave myself hope without even realizing that I always had it within me. I just had to knock the door for something inside me to open it and go like, hey, I know you.
Hmm.
We meet again. Let's sit. Let's have a conversation. So Inertia is a collection of those poems where there's no specific emotion that can bind a reader to it,
Right.
but it will send a reader through, let's say, a maze.
Right.
My point is not to make you feel something, like I said. My point is to make you aware that you're feeling something.
Right.
That is the
So the
intensity.
awareness is very important.
Yes.
And for anyone who's reading poetry,
Right.
awareness is a very critical thing, right? Like you have to
Yes.
live the emotion to understand what the person is saying, so to speak.
100%. So, see, this is why I prefer poetry as a mode of expression, right? Writing is somewhere where you can say things with exactness and accuracy. We can talk about this room. We can talk about the kind of books, the person sitting here, the colors, and all of that. And then we can take a step back and have the reader experience that.
Right.
With poetry, there's this beauty called as reading between the lines.
Right.
Poetry I can make this room an emotion without talking about the room at all. Poetry is just possibilities.
Right.
Poetry is where you can come very close to saying what you want to, but then just stop there. You have the reader take that last few steps. It is there that the beauty of the connection between a poet and a reader arrives.
So you take the horse to the water.
Absolutely, very close to it. Where I'll write something which I know is going to, you can relate to it, but I won't tell you, "Okay, Avnish, this is what the poem is about." I come very close to it.
But sometimes do you want the horse to drink it also?
As long
I'm
as the
sure you
horse
have
is,
that.
as long as the horse can stomach it, because see, at the end of the day, we could be, I could be in my head someday the world's greatest poet, perhaps,
Right.
or you could be.
Right.
Of what use is being the best
Right.
if it's, I believe, at the end of the day, not going to hold a reader's hand, sit with them, and go like, take your time with this. Which is why I have a fundamental issue when poets write to impress and intimidate with their vocabulary. I'm sorry, this is not your job. Your job is to not intimidate and make a reader feel, okay, what am I actually like? A lot of people say this to me, ki, I'm sorry, poetry is very confusing, it's very intimidating, we don't understand it. It's not your flaw, it's the fact that our system, the way poetry has been approached by our educational system, we've had to memorize a poem.
Yeah.
That is where we have lost.
Yeah.
You cannot memorize a poem. It can happen once you love it. We memorize or the lyrics to a song by listening to it a lot of times. And why does that happen? Because we love the song.
Right. Understood. Yeah.
Right. So I don't like it when poets write in a way where they want to intimidate with complex vocabulary and like very heavy metaphors. यार वो हिंदी में एक रज़ायत नाम का बहुत प्यारा शब्द है और ठहराव, like these are my two favorite words. It needs to have that stillness, that pause, that finesse without making you go like, you know what, Avnish, you really need to be a certain kind of reader to understand poetry. No.
Understood.
There's a book here somewhere I remember where it says all poetry is protest.
It's there. I've put it out.
No coincidences. No coincidences.
I've put it
I'm
out.
not
I knew,
kidding you.
I knew we were going to talk about this.
I saw this right now. I'm not kidding
What
you.
are you saying?
I saw this right now.
We will talk about a bunch of books which are on the
Right,
table.
right.
But so this is self-published.
This is self-published.
And how did you go about, and how is it doing? Tell us, a bit
This
more
is,
about the journey, because so we've spoken about what
Yeah.
the contents are of this book.
Right.
I think one detail which you've not mentioned is that each poem has a song.
Yes.
It's a very interesting positioning. Let me
Yes.
now use
Yes.
marketing words.
Let's go.
Right?
Yeah,
I know
yeah.
you'll hate it, but it's a very interesting positioning of a song attached to the emotion of
Right.
writing, right?
Right.
Um, I think music and poetry is a very potent combination.
Yeah,
People who have a grip on this
yeah,
can really open doors which couldn't be opened. Like they are like
right.
solid.
Yeah. So interestingly, there's a reason why even when I was toying with the idea, can I put songs? Can I put songs at the top of every poem? What is that going to do? And back then, I had no logical reason to do it. And I'm really grateful that I did not rationalize my thought process out of it. Where is kuch hone nahi wala, why are you doing it? I still went with it. I'm really glad. Because a lot of people told me something very interesting. There are times when we don't quite understand what the words in that poem are saying, but we listen to a song and we get the emotion of it.
Right.
It worked very brilliantly for me, and I hadn't even envisioned it. I
Right.
hadn't even imagined that something like this would happen.
Right.
It just happened where these are the songs I that really influenced me, that made me feel something when I was writing that poem. So the songs and those poems are just, I don't know, like chai and biscuit, or
I
it's
like
just
I like the combination of chai and
chai and
biscuit. Like
biscuit. Yeah, yeah.
what a simple everyday thing.
And the funny part is we're sitting in a cafe that has incredible coffee, where we both love the coffee. We've had extensive conversations about why is it that when we wake up or when we are really down, a part of us always wants chai and biscuit. That is it. You can have the world's best specialty coffee, the place where you come from, the place that recognizes that comfort. That is what poetry should do,
Right.
which is what my
A
music.
cup of tea on a rainy day.
Simple cup of tea, or Parle G biscuits, nothing fancy.
Interesting.
Just that simplicity.
Interesting.
So it's self-published. Going back to the question, it's, it's going to sound very crazy. I literally looked up publication houses on Google. I clicked the first one. I contacted them. All of this was happening when I did not have any money to do any of this. I literally had to borrow money from my mother. She didn't even know I wanted to get published. One day, like over a weekend, I had a conversation with my publication agency. And on Monday, I tell my mom, you know what, I'm going to need an XYZ amount of money because I'm going to publish a book. And I remember her in the kitchen, she was doing something, she was cooking or cleaning. And she just looks around, she's, ready to go to the office. And she's just like, we're having this conversation on a random Tuesday. She's like, you clearly couldn't find a better time to do this. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't know. So the point is, it happened so casually. I did not even imagine having this very serious conversation about my career and all of that. I'm just like, let's see what happens.
Right.
Koi hai kya jo padega
Right.
if I publish a book?
So it was more of a pilot.
Haan, it was
experiment.
more of an experimentation. Ki chalo kuch nahi to there will be a book that has my name, some of my poems out there, and that's it. Then
Yeah,
I'll
interesting.
detach.
But then, did you face? Of course, you must have faced multiple challenges. But let's talk about publication.
Right.
Or let's talk about how young people who want to put their work out.
Right.
I sense that it's not an easy task because
Yeah.
it's intimidating. You can't reach out to the major publications. Of course,
Right.
Amazon makes it easier that you can
Yes.
self-publish. But
Yes.
and this is a very important point which we need to talk about because
Right.
I think the world needs more expression.
Yes.
The world needs more poets. Of course, Instagram is one way of showcasing
Yes.
it, but a lot of people might face challenges that how do I go about publishing my own book?
Right.
Who do I go to? How do I sell? Did you face all these challenges? And do you think that there is a gap in the market today for a budding, good, aspiring poet to be able to articulate all of this and put it as a business, so to speak?
As a business is a very tricky question because we now exist in the instant gratification and reels era, where everything is so digital and so out there. Poetry fundamentally exists for a person to take a pause from the constant consumption, from the constant speed with which you're living or existing. Poetry is time you spend with yourself, right? For a writer, for a poet, as well as someone who's reading poetry. So in today's world, poetry as a business might not necessarily have the same route which you and I can envision, where a poet is writing, then the book happens, and then he becomes a bestseller. Perhaps that's not a very typical way poetry can exist as a
But why?
business.
I mean, is
Because
it because
reading-
it is not? It's difficult to reach
No, because
publication
fundamentally
houses?
reading itself is something that
Is
is,
it a dying art?
it's not dying, because as long as humans exist, I believe that reading and writing are things that will never stop existing. But the amount of people, it's, who read or who would like to read and write, not a lot of good readers left, not a lot of good poets and writers arriving in this world because of that as well. So it's a symbiotic relationship. But when you talk about this becoming a very sustainable business for someone who wants to, call themselves a published poet, or as someone whose business is poetry, perhaps not in the typical way, not perhaps in this way exactly all the time in the future, but there are other ways this can exist as a business. For example, a lot of movies and music industry and a lot of other visual platforms and visual forms of media are now incorporating poetry and poetic elements into them. So for a poet, there will always be place not just in the world but also in the business,
So
if
it's
he's
not.
really smart with
So
it.
to kind of conclude this
Yeah,
this point, you don't. Well, the first part of the question is, and we can do a yes or no on
yeah,
this. Is it difficult to go and reach out to a good publication house today?
extremely difficult,
Extremely difficult, right?
extremely
And is
difficult.
there a gap and which needs to be fulfilled?
Yes,
Because I've heard so many people saying that I have so much talent and I've written, but no one is taking me seriously. I don't know where to go. It's not organized, and
yeah,
all of this has always kind of tilted on the elitist kind of
hundred
society, so to
percent,
speak.
hundred
But a
percent.
upcoming budding
Closet
person,
closet writer, we can call it closet
closet
poet.
writer,
Yeah.
find it very difficult, and they don't, and
Yes.
that's true for I think everything, like as a music producer to reach a record label, even as a cricketer coming from a
Yeah.
district to kind of get access to all of
Yeah.
this, so it is difficult.
It's extremely difficult, especially if now you make music, right? If I'm to tell you, Avnish, 5 years ago, this is the music you've created. Without telling you, you've created this. You're now looking at the end product. It's always going to feel very intimidating. Ki, man, what is the journey that one must take?
Right.
What are the process? Recording label कौन सा है? क्या करना पड़ेगा? It is difficult. I'm not saying it's easy. Also very layered, very complex. You got to pull the right strings, have the right contacts. All of this, if you really want to arrive in the market, as we say, and stay as the bestseller. If your job is to truly express, if your job is to truly write and publish for the joy of it, for there are a few close ones who really like your writing, and you just want to do it because there's something inside you, then it's not difficult. Then there are a lot of independent publication
So there
houses.
are,
There are a lot
because
of
I just want
publication.
to get a sense of this. If I am a poet
Yeah,
and I have written stuff which people like,
right,
how easy it is for me to get access to a publication house. I mean, if today it is easy, then I think the word needs to be put out there that guys, write, go meet, knock
right,
doors, do your meetings, and
right,
somebody will get your book out.
right.
That's one part of it. And second one, you said is that you don't necessarily need to stop at a book, because there are other avenues like
Absolutely.
films,
Yep.
content, OTT, social media. Every aspect of life somewhere
Right.
is taking from poetry, writing,
Yeah.
all of that. Because at the end of the day, it's a medium,
Abs-
right, for the audience, whoever is
Yes.
going to consume it, right?
Yes. So if you really want to, if poetry is something you do, and if you want to publish a book, there are way too many publication houses out there. Independent publishing is thriving right now. You pay an XYZ amount of money and they will publish it for you. That is not a problem. It comes with its own pros and cons. If I go getting into the technical jargon and all of that right now, independent publishing might not necessarily help you with marketing your stuff, might not necessarily put you in the limelight. There's a lot of stuff you have to do it for yourself. They're just going to take care of the physical publication part. So it won't surely have the benefits of, let's say, if I can say the names out loud, of Penguin or HarperCollins, because those are established names. When Penguin launches a book, people don't think twice before
Buying it.
choosing it. If I'm to show you, let's say, Penguin, this is one of the book published by Penguin versus an independent author publishing their stuff through independent publication agency. Chances are you choose the Penguin, you know, 4 out of 5 times. That is also because, and it exists in every industry, right? We have Sony with the recording music and all of that. With cars, we have a certain brand. So when established brands are out there in the market and they have the majority of the share of that market, it is up to the consumer to really explore and give new things a shot. And it's very difficult because you're spending money at the end of the day. So it's not always that you'll take that risk, especially in reading. We see a lot of people going like, this book is for 700 rupees. इसमें ऐसा क्या है?
Got it.
700
Understood.
रुपए का दारू और
Understood.
ये हो सकता है, बट 700 रुपए की बुक तुम्हारी लाइफ चेंज कर सकती है भैया. वो हो नहीं. So it's a lot of commercial aspects also stop writing from thriving in general.
Right.
So there's a lot of that.
So what's next? Well, you've got Inertia out. It's been
Yeah.
what, 2 years?
Inertia is 2018.
You've got a stellar social media following now. People are really getting impacted by the way you write. What's next for Yashodhaan?
So right now, second book and the process of it. Still writing.
Oh, you're
still
writing a
getting-
second book.
I'm writing a second
Nice.
book. I'm genuinely pushing on, trying to sound more like myself, because I'm coming from a very heavy phase where I wasn't writing like myself, where I wasn't sounding like myself. So this phase is a lot of me coming home to myself right now. A lot of experimentation with my craft, better translation of my art through it, better conversations with friends, family, truly trying to understand who am I as a person and individual. A lot of self progress, self analyzation, or self analytical perspectives are happening right now. As for writing, the second book is happening. Also working on a couple of musical stuff with great friends of mine. I'm also working on a script. So जहाँ पे writing है कुछ ना कुछ तो चल ही रहा है. Like I'm exploring and seeing what all where all what doors can I knock with my writing. So that is happening, and that will keep happening, I believe. But what's happening in my personal life is more important, because at the end of the day, that is the medium, right? If that is not sorted, if that is not honest, intense, passionate, all the good things, then writing is not going to come out like that. So focusing on getting better mentally, physically, just
But do you think that you or can a poet, and this is something which I've been thinking about a lot, like
Yeah.
can a poet differentiate himself or herself as a human being and as a poet? Like, if there are two hats which one has to wear,
Yeah.
are they parallel? Do they intersect? Does one overpower the other? Does it get confusing? Because you might want to meet that crowded person again because it's familiar, but that crowded person also has to evolve into a grown-up
Right.
grown-up person in that room, right?
Right.
So, as you said, and I'm picking from a point you mentioned that now your writing has changed
Yeah.
from what you wrote in Inertia. You're
Right.
coming home to yourself. The phases of a poet, is it consistent? Do they again go back to their pain, back to familiar things, back to feeling like it becomes like a shield without even noticing that there is always a shield because
Right.
it's always been there.
Right.
When does that kind of, do you separate it or does it really confuse you even more?
I think a lot of other poets, I'm guessing, would be able to separate it, because people who have a very clear relationship with poetry as poets can. Ki poetry is something I do. I cannot constantly exist as a poet. Is what most poets out there can function as. If I'm to be entirely honest and vulnerable, I struggle. For me, I cannot separate. Because even in my happiness, my sadness, my longing, melancholy, my the meme phase of life, as well as joke around, I'm always a poet. It's not something I can put on the side burner or the back burner. But what I can be mindful about is how this poetry, or how this poet, the interpersonal relationships, the perspectives of life, to what extent is it adulterating or influencing?
Right.
Because not everything can be poetry for everyone. I'm completely fine with everything being poetic.
But yeah,
It's very tough when you exist in society. Not everything can be poetry for the people you are connected with.
right.
In fact, family.
Right.
A lot of times, families do not function very well when there's a person who's a poet. Because nothing is what it seems, it's always intense.
But then one could say that it is like the clothes you wear. It is a part and parcel. If one has to understand, like you're wearing trousers and you're wearing a t-shirt, right? So it's
Yes.
a part of you right now. It's a part of your aura. It's a part of your attire.
Right.
So if you replace this or like just add on the words,
Yeah.
one then needs to just take that with you and whatever comes with it. I mean,
See,
do you feel misunderstood then?
See, being a poet does not mean that you're different, less, or better than anyone else. Nor does it mean that you won't do things which other people are doing. No, you are going to have similar interests. You are going to have a similar lifestyle to a lot of people. Being a poet is all about perspectives and that inner voice at the end of the day, right? And unlike, for example, the analogy that you used, it is an outfit you cannot cast away because, for example, if I'm looking at the sky and you're looking at the sky, there's a very good case to be made that you would be moved by it and then you would let go of it. You would move on to a very today, right now based scenario where your attention is needed. I cannot cast aside that outfit because I'll be lost in the need to express.
Right.
It is not only an addiction, it's also such an. It's in the blood. There is no other way to say it. Poetry goes beyond all the layers. It is the ultimate final truth. And there is no other way to be dishonest with it because how does a poet stop wanting to express? Because then you'll have to stop feeling.
Right.
Same for a musician. Same for any artist, to be
Of
honest.
course, I think at the root of all art
Yeah.
is pretty much fundamentally the same.
Absolutely. It's
And
your
there's
truth.
no difference between
Yeah.
between any.
100%.
So, which is your favorite poet? Who has influenced you the most? Let's. This conversation has, and I think every conversation has a tinge of spirituality in it. And before we get lost in the usual way,
Yeah.
let's come back to. Let's talk about your favorite poems. One of your favorite poems about inertia. Um, who has influenced you? I know I came, for me, I got introduced to poetry to Yashodhaan, and I stumbled upon Jeffrey McDaniel, and oh
Man,
my
so
God,
he was going to be one of my
so
choices.
good, And,
Oh,
you made a point before that we've never been exposed in our school to all of this. Like
yes.
poetry has always been
Yes.
Shakespeare.
Yes. And we've been taught poetry.
Only that, right?
Yeah.
But now,
Yeah.
with the access, oh my God,
Yeah.
these poems, the writings, they
Yeah.
impact your life. Like,
100%.
I have been impacted by some of the things which I've read, which are so close to me
Yes.
that they are like anchors. Sometimes when there is silence,
Yeah.
you recall these things, right?
100%.
Had this been in my early days,
Yeah.
had in my school days, I would be a more wiser person, like generally
Wiser.
more emotionally
Absolutely.
exposed, and
Absolutely.
understanding perspectives, because
Right.
it said it beautifully. Perspective is everything. Everyone has their own version of reality, right? And then
100%.
there's no right or wrong.
Yep,
It's their
yep,
version of it.
yep.
So Jeffrey McDaniels for me,
Yeah, it's, I mean, truly astounding, one of the greats. Uh, but before we get into, the Western ones, let's talk about, the ones who share our home, our nation. Uh, Genuinely love Gulzar's work. Rahat Indori was, I mean, truly fabulous writing and poet. Javed Akhtar Saab to hai. Then there is, a very different breed, a very different intensity of a poet, Shire, John Elias Saab. Absolute favorite. Like my exploration into Urdu, Hindi writing started with John Elia.
right,
Because that kind of intensity, that kind of passion, there's no rationality in the way he will self destruct in his writing, which is why he allows people to hold on to themselves when you read his
right,
work.
right.
John Elia hai, I mean, there are a lot of truly astounding Indian poets. Also, Amrita Pritam.
Amrita
Beau-
Pritam.
Beautiful,
Okay.
beautiful. Uh, it's just all, I can never think of the names when I'm put in a spot. But for Western ones, Jeffrey McDaniels, Lucas Regazi, Mary Oliver, Margaret Atwood,
So all of these have
Shinji Mu.
influenced you,
Absolutely. And I cannot choose a favorite from India or Western because I don't believe I have a favorite one. I do believe I have had phases where these poets have shaped me.
right?
They've allowed me to find my voice. They've, guided me. They've watched over me. And I wish I was someone who actively read more. I am too distracted these days, or for a lot of time. I wish I could, I'm not one of those who will sit and truly explore all kinds of writing. I have my moments, and I'm a
Right.
very, very moody, very in the moment kind of a reader. But right now, for us as Indians, we have phenomenal writers and poets coming on. Truly great. Like the younger generations, people in their 20s right now, something inside me says we are going to see incredible poetry from these people.
People are not afraid to express now.
And not only that, they are the amount of exposure they have to good literature right now, like you said. So they're prepared, they're well prepared. All they have to do is find their voice, translate it, and be honest with it. We're actually going to see a lot of great writers and poets from, coming from the younger generations, and it gives a lot of hope. It should give a lot of hope to not only you as a reader, but you as an Indian, that we as a nation are going to do well in literature. There is something inside me that says that. So
I think it's time for Indian literature to shine.
yes,
It's never been the right moment. I mean, it should have happened before, and I think it's
100%.
changing from a schooling level also, and
Yes,
I think subculture is ensuring that Indian
yes,
literature needs to
yes.
have its place and all that comes with it. So
True, and it's a good time
it's a good
to
time.
for Indian literature. Yeah,
I think another important thing which I have observed and we should talk about is whenever you sit at cafes,
yeah,
you've always written something on tissue papers and you write something beautiful and then you throw it in the dustbin.
yeah,
So I want to talk about that.
yeah,
You are a big book bar regular, so I definitely
yeah,
want to talk to you about your
yeah.
favorite books here and what are you reading and how space influences you as a poet.
Right. So, can I start with the first part of the question?
Any part.
So the reason why I write on tissue papers is,
Wait, before you answer this, we
oh,
have
you already have
we
one. I
have what
cannot believe that.
Yashodhaan wrote for Book Bar.
Ah,
This is
yeah,
how he
yeah,
writes,
yeah, yeah. I remember this one.
right? And I'm going to read it out. From Yashodhan to Book Bar readers, the world turns a degree in my chest. Each time I look away, what I mean to say is that every time I'm not looking at you, something out there changes for me. Wow.
Yeah, it reminds me of something.
I hold your name in my mouth like a shard of glass. If I mispronounce or don't say it, I lose my way to form all the words. I belong to you the way waves do. The sea, all I am, exists because I can come back to you. Wow, that's some intense
This
stuff which I
this
have not understood at all.
last bit we have to really cut off
But anyway,
because these are explorations. It's
I hold your
not the
name
way.
in my mouth.
Yeah. So
Anyway, so this is Yashodhan writes on tissue papers like these and very interesting, thought-provoking stuff, and then he just throws it in the bin when he leaves. So
it started off with, so all of these, this started because there's a lot of random emotion and writing that keeps happening in my head. I'm constantly writing. It's not a very good thing. I don't say it with pride because there's a constant thing going on in my head where I'm trying to write poetry, and this is a way where I can put things out there and take a breather. Is how it actually started. It started because as a poet or writer, I've never had a pen or a notebook.
but why
It is
throw
the
it?
most embarrassing. I throw it away because I realized it is my way I can very rightfully detach from something I've written. Otherwise, a lot of writers, you'll realize, are having issues with the ending of what they're writing. They struggle once that last full stop, that last period has been hit on the paper, they cannot detach. It arrives a lot also due to, the need to be perfect, or it arrives a lot due to ego, or whatever reasons are. You have to exist in a state of detachment from what you've written. You cannot constantly go and change your ending because that is not the reality of an ending. An ending will only arrive once and it's done. And that is the beauty
So
of it.
detachment is the key
Detachment.
word.
I do not want to develop a sense of pride or cockiness in my head. Okay, look, this is what I wrote. That no matter how great an idea is or a poem turns out on the tissue paper, I'll throw it away because it's been a gift that was given to me. I come from a place of spirituality, which is why I was simply a medium. I was simply the mouth through which the words were uttered. Someone else was speaking, is how I usually look at it. And also, it helps with, when someone is an overthinker, it helps to put things out there. Going
Right.
back to my teacher's advice,
Right.
it helps sometimes when you find people who know why you do what you do. Otherwise, as always, you're the weirdo on a table writing on tissue paper, as most people point out. So that is the thought process behind it. That is how I do it. And sorry, what was the second question?
Your favorite book at Book Bar, and how this place has inspired you, because you do a lot of writing here. And,
Yeah. To be honest, I can't find my favorite book. It's Krishnamurti's.
Okay.
One of Krishnamurti's books, I forgot the title. But second is also History of Jazz. Really, really admire that book.
We've
And
got something which is here as well,
yeah,
right?
yeah. I love this one.
Dialogues. Which was the one which you?
No, wait. Tolstoy is, I mean, I'm reading a lot of random philosophy and, trying to genuinely enter into a reading phase again because I struggle to read. So Tolstoy obviously is, I mean, it's truly
Leo
phenomenal
Tolstoy
writer.
by
Yeah,
Anna Karenina.
yeah, I mean, it's the other way around. Leo Tolstoy is the writer.
Okay, we'll cut this part.
You will have to cut this part. Joote padenge.
Yashodhaan, this is the book.
No, but Murakami's Kafka on the Shore. I mean, it's one of my. I love Murakami's work. People hate it. Also, there was I forgot. Are yaar, ye dekho. How can one not choose this when it's? I mean, out there.
This way.
People can't see. Okay,
Yeah,
Lord of
people
the
can see
Rings.
this. So, Lord of the Rings, one of my
Yeah,
favorite books.
absolutely. I mean,
We've,
Tolkien is
the place has
legend.
a lot of inspiration.
Legend,
Book Bar has a
legend.
lot of inspiration
Yeah.
from Lord of the Rings. So,
Yeah.
so you've been hanging out, reading.
Yeah, so I love this place and this vibe a lot because it reminds me of that beauty and that joy as a child I would get when I used to enter crosswords or what was the other bookstore that we had very famous? Anyway, so the joy of losing myself in a bookstore where there are thousands of worlds out there, you just have to choose one. So Book Bar in this place, and I can speak, if I may say so, I can speak on behalf of a good deal of readers who sit in this area, that all of these are possibilities to enter a different world.
Right.
Which is why I love being around books in general, especially books at Book Bar.
Right.
Because there's a very different emotion that happens inside you when you realize there's no matter what you're going through in life, you can borrow someone else's voice and lose yourself in a different world and
Right.
come out when you can.
Right.
Truly nothing bad happens when you lose yourself in a book. I refuse to believe that. You'll always find yourself. So this is the beauty of books, and especially books at Book Bar, where everything is it's how do I say this? It's very posh, controlled chaos, where the books haven't been compartmentalized for a certain reason.
Right.
Come and lose yourself in the joy of exploring.
Right.
Is what the conversations we've had as well. So this is why I truly like being around books in general at Book Bar. So yeah, that's it.
Awesome. So I think we've come to we could go on talking a lot. And
We are going to have the same conversation in 5 minutes, right in that
but
other place.
I think it was a wonderful conversation. I think we understood largely how everything started for you. The feeling of abandonment,
Yeah,
how that translated into you expressing internally,
right.
Through poetry,
Right.
and how your formative years was with your education and
Right,
your
right.
tryst with impressing a girl, and how love as an
That was
emotion.
a one-off, by the way.
Love was an emotion
Yeah,
which
yeah.
which really
Yeah, yeah.
fueled everything, and
Right.
then coming to that point where you realize that how you and your words are vehicles which are empowering someone else's life, which got you to believe in yourself that what, I think I'm a medium. I
Right.
think I'm someone to who has been sent by the universe to do something which may not impact me currently, but it is
Right.
definitely empowering and impacting someone else's life.
Yes.
And sometimes you do it through poetry, and sometimes you can also do it through just simple Instagram comments, which can really change people's lives, right? So anything can be poetry, and true to its words, you can
Oh.
become a great medium for very. That's an internal joke, but.
Very. All I'll say
Uh,
is I may be a poet, but I'm sitting in front of someone very smooth himself.
Right.
So yeah.
But I think wonderful conversation, Yashodhan.
Yeah.
I think I hope people with this know a little bit more about you,
Yes.
with the hope of wanting to know even more, and coming and meeting you at Book Bar and having a coffee, and
Is that why we are doing all of this?
getting really lost in the world of poetry. I think it's
Yeah.
a beautiful world.
That
Thank you
is
for introducing poetry in my life.
my pleasure.
It's great to have you at Book Bar, and of course, a coffee connoisseur. Without saying, I
Always.
think music, poetry, coffee,
And chai.
and chai,
Chai.
and just I think your presence impacts a lot of people,
Thank you so
irrespective.
much. It's
So,
truly one of my
pleasure
favorite
to have you in
places.
the
Yeah.
second episode of Conversation of Authors.
Absolutely.
We'll
Yes.
have
Thank you
a
for having me and
more
doing
detailed conversation soon.
creating a
Thank you.
phenomenal place.